Hi everyone, I'm Gwen from Nile, and today I'm excited to share with you that we're making Nile's Serverless Postgres with our virtual tenant databases available for your modern SaaS applications anywhere around the world. Well, we're starting with Central Europe and we will continue spreading out across the world based on your requests. So for you to use those new regions, we're also shipping a new SDK that makes it really trivial to use databases that you place in different regions without a lot of configuration. So in this tutorial, I'm going to start by showing you how to create a database in Europe. I'll show you how to use the new SDK and use this new database. And we'll do this little demo so you'll see how it goes. And then we're going to talk a bit about why you may want to choose a different region for your database and how to pick a good region. I'm going to do a small demo around that as well. Let's get to it. We're going to start by creating a database. Okay, so I'm creating a database in Europe and the demo, so I'll call it EU demo, and you can see now we have two regions, so I'm picking Europe. Okay, so EU demo is ready, and now in order to run my demo, I'm going to have to create a few tables, as one does when they have a new database. Okay, so we have the embeddings and the files table. Now, one last thing while I'm still here in the console is to grab credentials for my database. So it's here in settings. So first of all, when you look in settings, you can see more details about your database. For example, the fact that it is in EU Central. And you also have few API URLs. In this demo, you're not going to need them, but there are other situations. If you try different examples, if you use Google SSO, for example, you may need one of those URLs. I'm just going to get credentials. So I'm clicking on copy them, because once I say that I save them and finish, I'm not going to have them anymore, and I'm going to need them in a second. That's it. Let's switch over to the command line. And the first thing to do is to create a copy of the demo. So in this case, I'm going to use the next React create with a template and use my example as a template. Okay, so let's go to the directory and we need some environment variables. So let's copy the example. And as I said, we have simplified things. So there are really only two configurations that you're going to need in order to use your new database, no matter where it is in the world, which is pretty cool. So you're going to need your username and password. That's it. That's it. Nile SDK takes the username and password, connects to Nile's control plane, and by authenticating with those credentials, it has access to information about the database. In which case, it can get from the Nile control plane, where is the database located, what is the database URL, what is the API URL. In addition to the username and password, there is also an optional parameter. You can put the database name here. Not mandatory, but if you have a lot of environment files lying around and you're worried that you'll forget which username and password belong to which database and make mistakes as a result, if it can be useful to have it here, Nile validates that you're connecting to the correct database with the username and password. So it will protect you from making mistakes. Now, if you're using Google SSO, UI components, React components, are going to need to know how to connect to Nile as well. They cannot use the username and password because it's the user's browser that is going to do that. And the last thing you want is your database username and password to go to anyone's browser, right? You have to keep it in the backend. So we have next public NileDB API, Next public means that it's going to the browser and therefore don't put secrets. And this is where you put the URL that you can grab from the general settings in the Nile console. It goes over here if you're using Google SSO. So let me grab the configuration and put it here. Now I also want to show you how we're using it in the code, because this has also changed from the first version of the SDK. This is where we configure Nile. As you can see, we don't actually have configuration. In the past, there was a big JSON here with all the information about the APIs and the database and username and password and all those things. We no longer do that. We just, you can put it there. It will still work. This is fine. But if it's not there, we just grab them from the environment variable. The precedence is that whatever you put in the configuration takes precedence over the environment. But in this case, we want to use the environment, so we configure absolutely nothing, which is pretty darn cool. Now for the React components, this is the server initialization, where we call the API and the database and so on. For the React components, it's still pretty much the same thing. You give a URL. There may have been other configurations like workspace and database, especially in Google SSO. You no longer need those other configurations. All you have to do is tell it where to find Nile, which again, you can grab in the console. And that's it. So simplified configuration it is. Now, one last thing I wanted to show you, because it's a new version of the SDK. So to validate that you have the correct one, npm list Nile database. Okay, and you can see that this is 2.3.1. You need version 2 and above, and you really want 2.3.1 and above, since there are bug fixes and configuration changes going in all the way until this exact point. Now that you have all that, let's run the example. And to start with, I need to sign up since I don't have a user yet. And now this is a demo of basically indexing, creating embeddings for a PDF. So later I can use AI to search it and ask questions about it. And because I wanted to demonstrate how much faster it is when the application and database are next to each other, I introduced a small feature that tells me how long things took. Okay, you can see that it took about 2.5 seconds for it to index. And this is actually a long time for a short document. And part of the reason I'm here, my database, on the other hand, is all the way in Europe. So this is a fantastic time to talk about which region am I going to use for my application. And first of all, one reason to pick a specific region is for regulation reasons. If you have customers in Europe, there are regulations around, I think it's called data sovereignty regulations. They say that if you're going to take a user's data out of a specific region, then you have to get their informed consent. And depending on the lawyers or random people on the internet that you ask and who you trust, it may be as simple as, a note in the terms of use, or it may have to be quite involved, and you'll have to check that they actually understand what they're asking and that you give them real alternatives and that it is a truly informed consent. A lot of time, it's a lot simpler to simply do the 2 clicks I've shown you and have a database over in Europe. So this is reason number 1, compliance. The second reason is latency. The thing to remember is this is the globe. I am over here in California, If my database is over there in Europe, then every time I make a request, it has to go from the app back and forth. Each one of those round trips is 100 millisecond-ish, but of course there is a lot of chance for lost packets over this entire distance or something going wrong and rerouting and so on. So all those back and forths are not great. Now, if your application is making, on every page it's making one call to the database, maybe not a big deal. But when you're embedding, you're going to have a lot of embeddings to store, and this is going to add up to all those back and forth. So it behooves you to make sure that your application and database are close to each other. Wherever you decide that your database should be, put the application right next to it, and ideally also right next to your users. And to show you how much it matters, because honestly, everything that I told you right now about the latency and back and forth and all those round trips, almost every developer knows. I don't think I told you anything new right now. But this is an important bit. Not everyone really has a good sense of how much it matters. So let me do the exact same thing with my database in Europe, my 8-page document to index, but this time I'm going to do one thing differently. I'm still here in San Jose, California, but let me put my application over in Europe. So I deploy my application to, you can do it obviously with every provider, right? When I go to settings and look at functions, this is where they're running my backend. You can see that I have a deployment here that is running in Frankfurt, which means that it's literally in the same data center as my database, which is exactly what I wanted. So let's see how fast this is. You can already see that it logged in a lot faster. And now let me do the indexing again. And you can see it shaved off about half a second right over there. The rest of the time is probably not round trips to the database. One last thing before we go. If you look at the create database, you can see that in addition to the 2 locations, there is a request a region link. You click on it, you land on GitHub, and you can see that our top requested location has been EU Central. We now have EU Central launching. If you want a different region, let us know, either over here or ping us on Discord, request more regions. We will quickly ramp up to the regions where we can have more users. That's it. Go ahead, request new regions if you want, clone the example, try to run it locally, try to run it with a close-by database, try to run it with a faraway database. Notice how much latency matters and make the right choices for your application.